My wife accused me of cheating while I worked to support her. Her best friend falsely reported me and took my daughter. But when the judge saw the evidence, the manipulator was exposed and fled the state. I'm 32 years old. I work in construction as a supervisor. And what happened in the last few months basically destroyed my marriage and almost destroyed my entire family. Michelle and I had been married for 5 years, and honestly, everything was pretty good. You know, we had our problems like any couple, but nothing serious. Nothing we couldn't work out by talking. We met in college. She was studying nursing and I was doing civil engineering. And she was always that super organized person, very calm, who knew exactly what to say when I was stressed about some project or exam. We got married when I was 27 and she was 26, and we spent like 3 years just enjoying being alone together, traveling when we could, building our life. We bought a small house in the suburbs. Nothing fancy, but it was ours, and I was working hard to move up in the company where I was because we wanted to have kids soon. And when Michelle got pregnant in March last year, it was literally the best day of my life. We both cried with happiness when we saw the positive test, and we started planning everything. Bought furniture for the baby's room, painted the walls yellow because we wanted the sex to be a surprise, and Michelle was radiant throughout the pregnancy, like that glow they say pregnant women get. She had it multiplied by 1,000. Her best friend Rachel was there the whole time too, helping her with the baby shower, going with her to doctor's appointments when I couldn't because I was working. And honestly, I was really grateful because Michelle needed that support. Rachel was a nurse too. They worked at the same hospital, and they'd known each other since college. So they were basically sisters. Isabella was born on December 15th, and this is where everything started going to hell. The birth was traumatic. It lasted like 22 hours. Michelle was exhausted. There were complications because the baby was in a weird position and they almost ended up doing an emergency C-section, but in the end, Isabella was born naturally and weighed 7 pounds. She was perfect. She had Michelle's eyes and my nose, and when I held her for the first time, I thought my heart was going to explode with love. You know what I mean? But Michelle wasn't okay. From the hospital, I noticed something was wrong because she didn't want to hold the baby. She said she was too tired, that everything hurt. And I thought, well, it's normal after 22 hours of labor. She needs rest. We went home 2 days later, and that's when things got worse. Michelle didn't sleep. Literally didn't sleep at all. Isabella cried every 2 or 3 hours to eat, like all babies do. But Michelle would panic every time she heard her cry. She'd just freeze in bed, and I'd have to be the one to get up, change the baby, bring her to Michelle to breastfeed, and then put her back to sleep. I tried to talk to her about how she was feeling, but she'd tell me she was fine, just tired, that it was normal, that all new moms went through this. I didn't know much about babies. Honestly, I was an only child and had never been around newborns. So I believed her. I believed her when she said it was normal to feel overwhelmed. I believed her when she cried at 3 a.m. saying she was a bad mother. I believed her when she asked me to leave her alone because she needed space. It went on like that for about 3 weeks, and I was exhausted because besides getting up all night with Isabella, I had to work during the day, and my boss had offered me a big project that required overtime, but meant a considerable bonus, money we desperately needed because baby expenses were way more than we'd calculated. I talked to Michelle about accepting the project and she said yes, to do it, that Rachel could come help her during the day while I worked. And that's what we did. I accepted the project, started working from 7 inches the morning to 8 at night almost every day, and Rachel started coming to the house around 10 inches the morning and staying until 6 or 7 inches the evening. At first it seemed to be working. Michelle looked a bit better when I got home. Rachel always had dinner ready or had cleaned the house, and I thought, thank God she has a friend like that because I can't handle all this by myself. But then I started noticing weird things. Michelle would get tense when I arrived, like she'd been waiting for me to show up so she could accuse me of something. She'd ask me things like, "What time did you leave work exactly? Why did it take you 35 minutes to get here if the drive is 30? Who were you talking to when I called and you didn't answer?" I'd explain that I was in meetings, that there was traffic, that sometimes my phone was on silent because I was on the construction site supervising and the noise was too much. but she didn't seem satisfied with my answers. One night, I think it was late January, I got home around 8, and Michelle was sitting on the couch with Isabella asleep in her arms and Rachel next to her, and they both looked at me in a way that froze my blood. Michelle told me we need to talk, and I thought, okay, this looks serious. Maybe she's finally going to admit she needs professional help, that what she has isn't just tiredness. I sat down in front of them and Michelle hit me with the direct question. You're having an affair, aren't you? I was literally left with my mouth open because what the hell? Where did that come from? I told her no. Of course not. How could she even think that? And Rachel then jumped in saying, David, let's be honest. You come home late every day. Your phone is always busy. You smell like women's perfume when you arrive. I was in total shock because none of that was true. I mean, I came home late because I was working. My phone was busy because I was working. And the supposed women's perfume was probably the smell of construction materials or who knows what because it definitely wasn't perfume. I tried to explain, but Michelle started crying, saying she knew something was wrong, that I had changed, that I didn't love her anymore, that I probably regretted having Isabella. That hurt me so much because I loved my daughter more than anything in the world, and I loved Michelle too, but clearly she wasn't well and needed help. I suggested that maybe we should talk to her doctor about how she was feeling, and Rachel immediately jumped in, saying, don't change the subject. This isn't about Michelle's mental health. This is about your infidelity. I got angry, honestly, because who was she to get involved in our marriage like that? I told her this was between Michelle and me, that I appreciated her help with the baby but needed her to give us space to talk alone. And Rachel looked at me with a hatred I'd never seen in her before and said, I'm protecting my friend from a liar. Michelle demanded to see my phone right there, right then, and I gave it to her because I had nothing to hide. She went through my messages, my calls, my emails, my Instagram, my Facebook, absolutely everything for like an hour, while I just sat there feeling like a criminal, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. Rachel was by her side the whole time, like whispering things in her ear, pointing at things on the screen, and I could see Michelle was getting more and more agitated, even though she wasn't finding anything, because there was nothing to find. Finally, she gave me back the phone and said, maybe you deleted everything. Maybe you have another phone, and I didn't know what else to say to convince her. I swore to her on Isabella that I wasn't cheating on her, that I loved her, that I was just working hard to provide for our family, but she went to the bedroom with the baby and left me there with Rachel, who told me you should sleep on the couch tonight before leaving. The next 2 weeks were hell. Michelle treated me coldly, constantly checked my phone when I was in the shower or asleep, called me at work like 5 times a day to verify where I was, and Rachel kept coming every day, and I knew she was putting ideas in Michelle's head. But I didn't know what to do about it, because if I told Michelle that Rachel was the problem, she'd think I was trying to isolate her from her best friend. One day I got home early, around 5 inches the afternoon because a meeting had been canceled, and the house was a total disaster. There were clothes thrown everywhere, drawers open, things pulled out of closets, and Michelle was in our room literally destroying the place, looking for who knows what. Isabella was in her crib crying at the top of her lungs, obviously needed to be changed and was probably hungry, and Michelle wasn't even hearing her. I ran to grab Isabella, changed her, tried to calm her down, and asked Michelle what she was doing. She screamed at me that she was looking for proof, that she knew I was hiding something, that Rachel was right about me. I said, Michelle, please, listen to me. There's no affair. There's no other woman. I'm just working, and you need help. This isn't normal. You left our daughter crying alone while you destroyed the house. She turned around and looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. It was like she didn't recognize me, like I was a stranger or something worse. And she told me, don't you tell me what's normal, you who come home smelling like a whore every day. I had never heard Michelle talk like that, never seen her so out of control, and in that moment I knew this had gone too far. I called Michelle's parents, who lived about 40 minutes from us, and explained what was happening. They came immediately, and when they saw the state of the house and Michelle's state, they were as scared as I was. Her mom tried to talk to her, but Michelle told them I had called them to get them on my side, that everyone was against her. Her dad pulled me aside and asked what had really happened, and I told him everything. About the project, Rachel's accusations, Michelle's paranoia, and he sighed and said, David, I think she has severe postpartum depression. She needs to see a doctor now. We tried to convince Michelle to go to the hospital, but she flatly refused, said she wasn't crazy, that the only problem was that her husband was a lying cheater. That night, I slept in the guest room with Isabella, in a bassinet next to my bed, because I didn't feel safe leaving her with Michelle. Michelle's parents stayed too, slept on the couch, and we were all on alert in case Michelle did something unpredictable. The next morning, around 7 a.m., Michelle came into the room where I was, woke me up, and demanded to see my phone again. I told her she'd already checked it 1,000 times, that there was nothing, and she started screaming, saying she knew she was right, that Rachel had seen my car near a motel last week. That was completely false. I didn't even know what motel she was talking about, but Michelle wouldn't listen to me. I tried to calm her down, put my hands on her shoulders so she'd look at me, and she thought I was grabbing her aggressively or something because she reacted by punching me in the face, direct hit to my right eye. I staggered backward from the pain and surprise, and her parents ran into the room hearing the noise. My eye was already swelling and hurt like hell, and Michelle was standing there with her fists still clenched, screaming for me to get out of her house, that she didn't want to see me again, to take my things and disappear. Her dad grabbed her and took her to the living room, while her mom asked me if I was okay, if I needed to go to the hospital. I could only think about Isabella, that I couldn't leave her there with Michelle in that state. I couldn't risk something happening to my baby. I made the hardest decision of my life in that moment. I grabbed Isabella, threw some of her things in a suitcase, and told Michelle's parents I was taking her to my parents' house until Michelle got professional help. Michelle heard that and came running, tried to take Isabella out of my arms, and her dad had to stop her while I left the house. She screamed that I was a kidnapper, that I was stealing her daughter, and I felt like my heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces because this wasn't Michelle. This wasn't the woman I'd married. This was depression, and Rachel's manipulation transforming her into someone unrecognizable. I drove to my parents' house with Isabella crying in the back seat and me crying too, because how had my life come to this? How had I gone from having a happy family to fleeing my own house with my 2-month-old daughter because my wife had hit me? My parents received me, saw my black eye, and my mom immediately went into protection mode. Grabbed Isabella and took me to the kitchen to put ice on my face, while I explained everything that had happened in the last few weeks. My dad, who's a lawyer, though he's retired now, told me I needed to document everything, to take photos of my eye, to write a timeline of events, to save all messages and calls, because this was probably going to end up in court. I didn't want to think about that. I still had hope that Michelle would seek help and we could fix things. But my dad was right to be cautious. That same night, around midnight, there was loud and aggressive knocking on my parents' front door. My dad went to open it, and there were Michelle and Rachel. Michelle looked deranged, her hair all disheveled, eyes red from crying, and Rachel had this satisfied expression that gave me chills. Michelle demanded I return Isabella immediately, that I had no right to take her. And Rachel said if we didn't hand her over, they were going to call the police to report a kidnapping. My dad, super calm, explained to them that I was Isabella's father and had every right to have her with me, especially considering Michelle had physically assaulted me that morning, and that if they wanted to call, the police go ahead. But they would see my black eye and Michelle would have to explain that. Rachel got furious and started yelling at my dad that we were a family of manipulators, that we were isolating Michelle from her daughter, and Michelle just cried, saying, "Isabella needs me. She has to breastfeed." I told her I'd bought formula and Isabella was fine, that she could keep seeing her daughter but needed to go to the doctor first, and Michelle screamed at me that I was the one who'd driven her crazy with my infidelity. My neighbors started turning on their house lights because of the commotion, and my dad finally told them to leave or he was going to call the police for disturbing the peace. Rachel grabbed Michelle and they left, but Rachel looked at me before leaving and said, "This isn't over. You're going to pay for destroying my friend." The next few days were crazy with messages and calls from Michelle, from Rachel, from Michelle's parents trying to mediate. I held my ground. Isabella stayed with me until Michelle sought professional help. Period. I hired a lawyer because my dad insisted, and we started the process to request a temporary restraining order against Michelle and especially against Rachel, who was clearly escalating the situation. We documented everything. The harassing calls, the threatening messages Rachel had sent me, the black eye, Michelle's parents' statements about the state of the house that day. It was depressing having to do all that against my own wife, but I had to protect Isabella. About 2 weeks passed, and according to Michelle's parents, she was getting worse and worse. She wasn't eating, barely slept, spent all day crying over Isabella, and when they suggested going to the doctor, she said all she needed was to get back her daughter that her cheating husband had stolen. Rachel kept going to the house every day, supposedly to support her, but I knew all she was doing was feeding Michelle's paranoia and rage. Michelle's parents called me desperately asking me to let them see Isabella, that maybe if Michelle saw the baby she'd calm down, but my lawyer advised me not to do it without supervision and proper documentation. On a Tuesday afternoon, February 18th, I got a call from the hospital where Michelle worked. They told me Michelle had had a breakdown at work, that they'd found her in the bathroom crying hysterically and saying she wanted to die, and that they'd admitted her to the psychiatric unit for evaluation. I felt a knot in my stomach because on one hand I was relieved she was finally going to get help, but on the other hand, it destroyed me to know the woman I loved was suffering so much. I went to the hospital that night, left Isabella with my parents. And when I got there, Michelle's parents were in the waiting room, devastated. Her mom hugged me crying and said, "I'm sorry, David. We should have insisted more that she seek help earlier. The doctors didn't let me see her that night because she was sedated." But the next day I was able to talk to her psychiatrist, a very kind doctor who explained that Michelle had severe postpartum depression with psychotic symptoms, that it was a serious but treatable condition, and that she was probably going to need medication and intensive therapy for several months. I told her everything about Rachel and the infidelity accusations, and the doctor sighed and said it was common for patients with this condition to be extremely susceptible to outside suggestions, that their minds were already in a vulnerable state, and any seed of doubt could turn into complete paranoia. I felt so guilty because maybe if I'd insisted more that she seek help from the beginning, if I hadn't accepted that work project, if I'd been more present, none of this would have happened. The doctor told me not to blame myself, that postpartum depression could happen to anyone and it wasn't my fault or Michelle's, but it was hard not to feel responsible somehow. Michelle was hospitalized for a week, and during that time I started to feel a bit of hope that maybe we could save our marriage once she was better. But then something happened that changed everything completely. Rachel filed a restraining order against me, alleging I was emotionally abusive to Michelle, that I'd manipulated her to make her look crazy, when really, I was the problem, and that I was a danger to Isabella. When I received the court papers, I wanted to die. Rachel had invented a complete story full of lies, said she'd seen me push Michelle multiple times, that she heard her cry because I insulted her, that Isabella was always dirty and neglected when I took care of her. Absolutely none of that was true, but there it was in legal documents. My lawyer got furious and told me this was clearly a harassment tactic, that Rachel was probably trying to take control of the situation and present herself as Michelle and Isabella's savior. The hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for 3 days later, and those 3 days were the most stressful of my life preparing my defense with my lawyer. The day of the hearing, Rachel arrived at court dressed all professional, with Michelle at her side who still looked fragile but at least was out of the hospital. Michelle's parents were there too, and when we saw each other, we exchanged sad looks because we all knew this was a disaster. The judge was an older woman, looked strict, and started the hearing asking Rachel to present her case. Rachel gave her testimony full of lies and exaggerations, and I had to sit there listening to how they painted me as an abusive monster when I'd only been trying to protect my daughter and get help for my wife. When it was my turn to speak, my lawyer presented all the evidence we'd compiled: photos of my black eye, Rachel's threatening text messages, the midnight calls, Michelle's parents' written testimony about the state of the house, the day of the assault, the hospital reports about Michelle's hospitalization, and we even got testimony from Michelle's psychiatrist, who confirmed my version of events was consistent with the clinical picture of severe postpartum depression. The judge listened to everything attentively, and then asked Michelle directly if I had ever pushed or physically mistreated her. Michelle started crying and said no, that the only physical incident had been when she hit me, and Rachel tried to interrupt, but the judge told her to be quiet. The judge then asked Rachel why she had filed a restraining order with false accusations, and Rachel started stammering, saying she was only trying to protect her friend. that I had clearly done something to cause Michelle's depression. The judge looked increasingly annoyed and finally said the restraining order was denied for lack of evidence and for filing false statements, and that Rachel could face perjury charges if she continued with this behavior. She also ordered that Rachel have no more contact with Michelle until her psychiatric treatment was complete, which was like a miracle because finally someone with authority was seeing that Rachel was the problem. After the hearing, Michelle approached me with her parents, and she looked different, more lucid than in weeks. She apologized to me, told me she regretted everything that had happened, that now that she was taking medication and doing therapy, she realized none of the accusations had been real, that Rachel had taken advantage of her vulnerable state to put ideas in her head. She asked if she could see Isabella, and I obviously said yes because I never wanted to separate them. I just wanted to keep Isabella safe. We went to my parents' house that same day. And when Michelle held Isabella after 3 weeks without seeing her, they both cried. Well, Isabella obviously just cried because she was hungry, but Michelle cried with emotion and regret. Over the following weeks, Michelle and I had several long conversations about the future. She was still in intensive treatment, went to therapy 3 times a week, and took her medication religiously. But she told me something that broke my heart. I can't be a mom right now, David. I don't trust myself with Isabella. I need to focus on recovering first. I understood her point, but at the same time it was devastating to hear my wife say she couldn't take care of our daughter. I asked her what she wanted to do about our marriage, and she was honest with me, said she loved me but didn't know if we could go back to what we were before, that too many things had happened. Too much damage had been done. We mutually agreed that we'd separate temporarily while she continued her treatment, and that I'd keep full custody of Isabella with Michelle having supervised visitation rights until her doctor considered her stable. It was a mature and sad conversation, like we both knew our marriage had probably ended but didn't want to completely admit it yet. We signed the separation papers in March, and Michelle moved back in with her parents to have the support she needed during her recovery. Now it's October. About 9 months have passed since all this started, and the situation is complicated but manageable. Isabella is with me full-time. She's 8 months old now, and is the best thing that's ever happened to me. She's a happy and healthy baby who has no idea about all the drama that happened when she was a newborn. Michelle comes to visit her twice a week, always supervised by her parents or mine, and you can tell she's much better. She's really working on her recovery, and I admire her for that because I know it's not easy. We talk cordially when it comes to Isabella, but we don't have the kind of conversations we had before. We're no longer that team we used to be, and I guess that's the saddest part of all this. As for Rachel, well, after the judge's order, she completely disappeared from our lives. I heard through the grapevine that she quit the hospital where she worked with Michelle and moved to another state, and honestly, I'm glad because she was a toxic influence that almost destroyed my family. Sometimes I wonder what motivated Rachel. If it was jealousy of the relationship Michelle and I had. If she had her own problems, she was projecting onto us. But I'm never going to know the answer, and honestly, I don't care anymore. I've started therapy too, because carrying all this is heavy, and my therapist has helped me process the guilt I feel, the anger I had, the fear I experienced during those dark months. Isabella and I now live in a small apartment near my parents who help me tremendously with childcare while I work. I went back to normal hours, obviously because that overtime project was indirectly what triggered everything, although I know it's not really the cause. The cause was postpartum depression that wasn't treated in time, and the manipulation of someone who should have been helping but only made everything worse. Last week, Michelle told me she's considering signing the divorce papers and ceding full custody permanently because she feels it's best for Isabella, that she needs stability, and I can give it to her better than she can right now. I don't know if she'll sign or if eventually she'll want to resume her role as an active mom, but whatever it is, I'm going to respect it because the only thing that matters to me is that Isabella is okay, and that Michelle is okay too. There's no resentment on my part, just sadness for what we could have been and weren't, for the family we imagined and that disintegrated before really beginning. It's weird to be raising my daughter alone at 32, when a year ago I thought I was going to grow old with Michelle and raise several children together. But life surprises you like that sometimes, doesn't it? And you can only adapt and move forward for the people who depend on you.